Welcome everyone to the very first episode of Goober Games, the very subjective series where I take a look at a widely beloved game and determine if it's actually good or not. Now, being a Goober game doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It means that even Goobers like it. But what exactly is a Goober? Well, Goobers are a hive mind of the lowest common denominator who typically buy the yearly Call of Duty, play Ubisoft games no matter how bad they get, and look like this. A Goober definitely wouldn't play Death Stranding, but absolutely plays Halo, just like everyone else. Some Goober games you wouldn't expect, like Detroit Become Human, The Walking Dead Telltale, and A Way Out, but those games are on the level where every Goober on TikTok puts them in their top 10 edits. And I figured, what better Goober game to cover first than the one so popular and profitable that it's on 3 different console generations, and single-handedly killed any chance Red Dead Online had at getting updated, Grand Theft Auto 5. I did play the PS5 version, and there will be spoilers, but it's the Goober game. Who hasn't played it? From the top here, I want to say that this game is not perfect. There are definitely some flaws to this game, and one of the biggest, figuratively and literally, is the map. It feels inadequate in both creation and replication. Obviously, Los Santos is supposed to be LA, but they replicate it at a surface level by stitching together a bunch of surrounding areas. Yeah, some areas of Los Santos are similar to certain parts of LA, Anaheim, and Burbank, but those areas are only like 4 blocks in-game. It feels like they just checked off boxes for the feelings they wanted to capture very artificially, because they just had to make room for the top 2/3 of the map. And honestly, those 2/3 are actually very similar to what they replicate. Sandy Shores and Paleto Bay capture the exact feeling of the rundown towns in the middle of California that you stop at to pee during a road trip. And that feeling is that I never want to be there again. Everything that can be fun to do in the top half of this map is spread out incredibly thin, to the point that there's a whole third of the map reserved for just one big mountain. Rockstar's next game, Red Dead Redemption 2, did have a similar problem, but only with the area unlocked in the epilogue. In the main story between each town, you will always find a house, a farm, someone camping, or an NPC random encounter that tells a story. While in GTA 5, most of the open world is just set dressing for you to look at while you drive on the highway. And one particularly rough part of this empty calorie of an open world is that there is no score to go along with it. A majority of people won't have this issue, but the way I get my footage for these videos is by live streaming my playthrough for the review privately, and then in the editing stage, I go back and look at the VODs and clip certain things I want to show. But since I'm still streaming it on YouTube, even though it's private, I can still get a copyright claim or strike, so I had to avoid the licensed music like the plague. So while I was driving by the set dressing on the highway, I had no music to listen to, just the sound of my car's engine. And again, this isn't a problem Red Dead 2 has. There is no radio, you ride a fucking horse in that game. But I never really felt bored even on the long rides because they have a great score that plays. But Rockstar was too dependent on the licensed music on the radio and didn't bother to add any for long drives without it. Which is especially irritating because the original score in this game is so amazing and has an 80s action movie feel to it. So while the open world does have some issues in both replicating and creating a city, you know, there's still some frosting on that shit cake. You obviously have some funny parodies like the Life Invader offices and Weasel news vans, but the game is surprisingly detailed. It doesn't help you can't go into any of them, but there are lots of fun shops and stores that make the city feel more real, like Cluck and Bell. I mean, it's not that hard to make a city feel real when you are copying a real city, but still, all these goofy company names and advertisements break up the monotony of gray skyscrapers while also leaning into that Rockstar humor. I really like especially how the great sound design will play in the distance in real time during cutscenes, which really enforces the feeling that the world exists without you.
Up here trying what to you mean, fuck this employee of the month shit, man? When there's some shit to be won, goddammit, I want it. I don't give a fuck what it is.
One thing, though, that really pisses me off is that for a good chunk of the game, Michael is stuck in literally the least interesting part of the map. But Ludendorff, the town you barely see in 2 missions and can't get into, looks like that? What the fuck, man? I want to go there! Well, what about the side missions found all around the map? Come on. Let's get real here. They're really bad. And I used to not think so. I thought they were pretty good. The paparazzi missions are funny and mostly revolve around driving, which is one of the best parts of this game. I really like the different types of races, like the jet ski, off-road, and street races, as the shitty payoff is overshadowed by the fun gameplay. And I really love the assassination missions Lester sets up for you. But the reason I thought the side missions were good was because those and the Dom missions were the only ones I played. The rest of them suck ass, and while the Dom missions are fun, I have problems with those as well because they don't really make any sense. These missions feel like fun set pieces the developers really wanted to put in the game but couldn't justify in the story. They wanted a mission where you jump out of a cargo plane on an ATV, but that could only really work in the Trevor Merriweather plane mission. But you can't do that there because the cars on the plane you use as cover would block the way out, or the ATV would go with them when they fall out. So they made it a Dom mission. They wanted a mission where you jump off a building and parachute onto the back of a truck, but that would really only work as an escape during a heist, and you can't really evade the cops in that truck without them falling off the back, so they made it a dom mission. They wanted some way to make use of the giant eyesore that takes up a huge chunk of the map, and decided on racing down it on BMX bikes. But I literally cannot imagine any other context but a dom mission where that would work. They're so disconnected and grandiose that these missions just feel out of place. But when I was getting 100% completion for Grand Theft Auto 5, those shitty side missions I skipped became mandatory. And holy fuck, I was miserable doing them. The only entity on this earth who got a workout from those triathlons and racing that tweaked out blonde lady is the X button on my controller. The weed missions are a funny gag for 3 seconds but go on for 10 minutes, and the Tanya missions are so fucking boring. All you do is get verbally berated by her while you drive this slow-ass tow truck, pick up a broken down car, and drive it back to the lot or to an auto shop. All because her cracked-out boyfriend is too high to do it himself. And then the second to last Tanya mission starts with her texting you to call her, saying that there's an emergency. So you call her and she says her boyfriend has gone missing. So you think, oh shit, he's missing. I'm gonna have to go get into a shootout and save him like I did for Lamar. This is gonna be so much fun. I'm finally gonna get to see some action and all this boring labor will have a payoff. But no! She doesn't ask you to find her missing boyfriend who could be overdosing or have been kidnapped. She just asks you to drive this tow truck again since she can't come into work. Because, you know, her boyfriend is the victim of a missing persons case. And the rest of the missions are as exciting as can be with the most obnoxious and boring, slow gameplay. Do you want to solve a murder case? Well then go collect 50 torn up pieces of paper that have scattered all across the state. Do you want to find an alien spaceship that landed on Earth? Well, guess what? It broke into 50 different parts that scattered across the desert. Do you want to get paid $250,000 for finding barrels of nuclear waste, as well as $23,000 per barrel on top of that? Well, you're gonna work for it because they are all in the ocean and you have to use the slow-ass submarine to find them, which will literally take you hours. And the reason you get a base pay of $250,000 for finding all of them is because you have to buy a property to start this mission. And how much do you think that property costs? Ding, ding, ding! You guessed it, $250,000! And honestly, I really wouldn't care that you break even at the end. $23K per barrel, 30 barrels, you end up with a net profit of $690,000. And that sounds great, except I'd say that driving the submarine is the absolute worst part of the gameplay in all of Grand Theft Auto 5. It is so slow, and you can only see in like a 20-foot radius. And in first person, it looks like the first Rapture cutscene in BioShock, except nothing interesting is happening. But like I said earlier, at least the driving is one of the best parts of this game, and the driving in this game is probably my favorite in a video game ever. The drifting just feels perfect, especially with rally cars, and I really do appreciate how in the story at least, totaling your car might bend the chassis and twist the wheel in a way that it can't move and slow you down. I will say though that it does have a few problems, like it's way too hard to properly navigate and drive straight in cinematic mode. The cops aren't programmed to drive on train tracks, so you can just drive onto a train bridge or go into the subway and easily lose your star rating no matter how high the star rating is. And the traffic can be really stupid and right there, you see what I mean? What the? Okay, lay off the horn! Oh. Even though the camera mode labeled as cinematic completely blows, the gameplay itself is very cinematic, especially in things like the heists and even outside of missions like during the stunt jumps. I really like how this game throws you right in with a heist as the prologue, and how they realized how cool it was to have multiple protagonists, to the point where even from the very start, there's barely any times where you can't switch characters. And real quick, to be honest, I really don't like how they have these Red Dead 2 style random encounters with good and evil options, especially considering how it has absolutely no impact on the player or plot, and at max nets you like $10,000 or $20,000 that you only get a while after the encounter happens. But my biggest problem with Grand Theft Auto 5's gameplay has to do with the firearms. The game aims your gun for you when you first aim down sights, which immediately makes you want to abuse that system by peeking in and out of cover. But it's annoying to do that because the targeting isn't perfect and will aim past the guy in front of you towards the guy in cover a country mile from you. And there is no differentiation between the guns. Sure, the miniguns and explosive weapons feel different when you do rarely use them, but no matter what modifications you do or don't add, every pistol feels the same, every AR feels the same, every SMG, LMG, and sniper feel the same. The only modification you can add to a gun that'll make it feel remotely different is a suppressor, because you can stay in stealth. And what's even worse is that the SMGs, LMGs, and ARs all feel interchangeable. The SMG is just an AR that has less range and fires slightly faster, and an LMG is just an AR with more range that fires slightly slower, so you might as well just use the in-between and stick with any type of AR with any modification. But I bet you're asking, Carter, what about the gameplay online? That's all anyone really plays anymore, right? Yeah, that's enough of that. Now let's talk about the missions in the story. A lot of them are really fun and provide great set pieces, like escaping Grove Street on jet skis through the canals, rappelling down a government building to free a captive, and robbing a train. But a few of this game's missions have no build-up whatsoever. Earlier in the game, you blow up the O'Neill's crack house and a few escape, and then hours and hours of the game later, Franklin just calls Trevor and says, "Hey, I'm tailing the rest of the O'Neills, let's kill him." Michael literally just has a conversation with Ron, and then Trevor runs in and says, "Hey, let's collide two trains together and steal the cargo." And speaking of that mission, some of the things in this game just push it a little too far, even for GTA standards. Trevor slams two trains together in a head-on collision, jumps off the towering bridge into the water, and is completely fine. Michael's drug trip is kind of funny, but is like introspective of Michael as a father, and it's like, it's fucking GTA, dude. During the Polito job, these three chuckle fucks managed to escape the US military by hopping on a train and waiting for a few hours. I know it's nitpicky, but the army wouldn't stop a train. And why does it get so intense that the army gets involved during the Polito score, but not the Union Depository heist, where you rob the huge bank that's never been robbed and carries gold and has been hyped up since the first mission of the game that isn't the prologue? And speaking of, the heists in this game are all over the place. The IAA building heist either involves parachuting with goofy controls or mopping the floor. The Merryweather heist I chose was 70% piloting a helicopter and a submarine, which blew. Blitzplay is probably my favorite, as it feels the most put together and cohesive with the timing of the garbage and tow trucks, even though you do get away way too easily. The Union Depository job is really fun with tense dialogue, and I love escaping through the tunnels into the canals during the jewelry store heist. But the setups for these heists can be fine, but mostly are okay at first and then have zero replay value, like casing the jewelry store and the most riveting, blood-pumping mission of all time. But it's not just the setups that are like that either. The yoga mission is one of the most boring video game missions I have ever played in my life. And robbing the Merryweather cargo plane is nowhere near as fun as you remember it is. The first 40% of the mission is you flying low to the ground for a few minutes and avoiding flying over the military base. Then the middle 20% is really fun. You crash the crop duster into the back of the plane and shoot your way through it, fucking hijack it as jeeps are flying out the open back, and then the last 40% is flying back and then you get shot at and you glide the plane around and then you jump out and then you slowly parachute back down to the ground. It's just that middle section is so much fun that you will completely forget about and will be disappointed by how boring the rest of that mission is. And what really bothers me is how many Trevor missions there are before you get back to Los Santos. Not because they're boring, but because you know that confrontation between Michael and Trevor is gonna be insane. And after an hour and a half of Trevor slowly closing in on the man who faked his own death and left him behind for 9 years, the two finally meet in Michael's house with his family, and we have no clue what Trevor is going to do. It feels like a bomb is gonna go off. He's an irate psychopath, and anything could happen. Including nothing, apparently, because that's exactly what happened. Nothing! I hate how they wrote the relationship between Michael and Trevor. They completely postponed their fallout, and there's no excuse. They just go help Tracy, and then they pick up right back where they left off. And with Trevor bringing up Brad every 4 minutes and how he recognizes Davey immediately, you'd think they'd be more aggressive to each other and that there'd be more tension. But they don't do anything with it until Trevor figures out that Brad was buried in Michael's place. The animosity they have after the court center shootout should have been present the entire game, which would make Trevor flying to Ludendorff and his return all the more tense. And I feel like the way they wrote plot points to happen is kind of lazy. Franklin, for some reason, is almost completely fine with Michael being in witness protection and a rat, and doesn't really need any convincing to stick with him. And you know why we even do the Union Depository job in the first place? Because they shoehorned Martin Madrazo back into the plot after his situation was completely resolved, and Trevor is being a dickwad and won't give Michael the statue to pay off Martin unless they do the Union job. And the family reunion is so sudden with no real reason for them coming back. It feels like a loose plot thread that Rockstar forgot about and then remembered at the last second. The FIB is literally doing to Michael what the government did to John Marston in Rockstar's previous game, Red Dead Redemption. And even when they justify a plot point in an amazing way, with a bunch of plot lines reconnecting and finishing their arcs all at the same time, in a way that is on par with the devil all the time, they still piss me off! This level, which is literally titled The Wrap-Up, is what I call a fucking finale. But there are 7 missions after this! It's so frustrating because this story is full of great ideas. It's just the writing of how we get there that is a frequent issue. However, what Rockstar is possibly the best in the industry at, though, is writing characters. I love how corny Michael is and how he and Steve fight for the non-existent action movie spotlight whenever they interact. Haynes is perfectly hateable, Davey plays the role of exhausted but efficient agent incredibly well, Lester is very bitter but really funny, especially with his interactions with Franklin.
You got me out here. You wrote me into your crazy world of bullshit. If it was lies, new age shit, and arguments about how good life used to be, I could have stayed my ass in Los Santos.
Hello, Franklin.
What's up?
Every time one character interacts with another, it is always so unique and never feels out of character, especially with the 3 protagonists. And the dialogue makes all of these characters feel real with real backgrounds, like how Trevor's experience in drug trading shows in the Grove Street mission, and how he tells Franklin to learn to laugh at himself, but can't when he trips on Franklin's fence. Yeah, it's inconsistent, but people are inconsistent. Everyone gets hypocritical at times, nobody's perfect, and I think that Trevor could be the poster boy for that sentiment. But my favorite character has to be Jimmy DeSanta. It is hilarious how much of a loser this guy is. Like how he's a kind of overweight white kid who lives on the West Coast and like, oh, he lives at home, you know, despite the fact that he's 20 years old and he plays a lot of video games. But he doesn't have a job though. Like how humiliating for this guy. But now that we've talked about the writing of and the writing that leads up to specific plot points, let's get into those actual plot points and look at GTA 5's quality narratively. When I first played this game, I expected Trevor's return to be what kickstarted the plot, but it's not some ghost from Michael's past or anything, it's who he is. Many people have pointed out that none of this would have happened if Amanda was, let's say, more conservative with herself. And it is kind of random that the house Michael pulls down happens to be the one that belongs to a crime lord, but I honestly really like that. He has a temper and is not a good person. This isn't the first time he's done something extreme like this, and eventually, he fucked with the wrong guy. His anger and lack of self-control over the years got him into the situation where he needs to get back in the game. But I feel like the way they convey information to you and what you learn and when you learn it is a bit confusing. Like, you get that the IAA and FIB both want Mr. K so they can interrogate him and get some info that could secure them a higher budget going forward, but they never tell you what that information is until the last mission of that plot. And it doesn't even really have much of an impact on the rest of the story. They fucking blast you with information in the prologue, which can be pretty hard to keep track of of and drip feed you a little more and more. You really only get the full picture when Michael tells Franklin about his situation at the oil derricks. But I feel like the game really would have benefited from us learning about Michael and Brad and witness protection the same time Franklin does, especially because that might make the player more inclined to kill Michael at the end of the game. And to finish off this video, I want to talk about how narratively fucked this game's ending is. I feel like what Rockstar is telling you the story isn't the story they actually pulled off. They want their game to have 3 protagonists, 2 endings where one of them dies, and the true ending where everyone lives. And they all kill anyone causing them problems, but that just doesn't make sense with the story they've set up. That feels way too forced and out of nowhere. And that's probably because the ending comes out of nowhere, when the character they plopped in the middle of the game and called the villain tells Franklin to kill Michael or Trevor. This is the way I see it. Yes, there are 3 playable characters, but there is only 1 main character and 1 protagonist. Franklin is our main protagonist. He's our point of view character. The game officially starts with him, and he's the one who decides the ending. But Michael DeSanta is the main character of this story. This whole plot, from North Yankton to the Union Depository, all lives and dies with him. To simplify it, it's as if everything about A New Hope was exactly the same. Luke is still the chosen one, and he still frees Leia from Darth Vader, and still gets his father's lightsaber from Ben Kenobi, but we mainly followed Han Solo instead, and how he got to the cantina and flew Luke to the Death Star and got his medal. So why is Devin Weston the villain? From a story perspective, it makes no sense that the guy who shows up in the middle of the game, and has no influence at all from before he shows up, is the main antagonist. This whole game is about the consequences of Michael's old life, and the villain should be a threat from then and now. And the only person who fits that role is Trevor Phillips, the guy from the lifestyle he ran away from, and who's a huge threat to both him and his family because of how he escaped, should 100% be the villain. And that's why killing Trevor is the most satisfying ending. The main character's most dangerous and most personal issue being resolved is a way better payoff than that issue suddenly just letting his problems with Michael go in the postgame, and working together with him to kill people who kinda pissed them off. But the issue is that they wrote themselves into a corner in relation to the gameplay by having 3 playable characters, because it would absolutely suck ass if Trevor died and then he wasn't in the postgame and you couldn't finish up his side missions. And the loose ends they tie up in the Death Wish ending aren't even a big enough deal to worry about if Trevor dies. What's Chang gonna do? He wanted Trevor dead too and probably wouldn't care too much about Michael if he helped out doing it. Yeah, Steve Haynes is still alive, but the writers could have just killed him earlier in the story when I thought he died. The only issue is Stretch, but they probably could have had him be at the sawmill you raid after he sets up Lamar and you kill him there. It's just so disappointing to see Rockstar set up such a clear plot and then brute force their way to the canon ending they want without leading up to it correctly. Grand Theft Auto 5 does a lot right, but it still gets a lot wrong. I do think that this is a good game, and I do understand why it's one of the highest grossing entertainment products ever. It has my favorite driving mechanics and is probably my favorite sandbox set in the modern day. But there are so many games that do combat, flying, story, and open world way better. This game kind of feels like a BlackBerry phone back in the day, where like there's definitely room for improvement, but they got the broad strokes down. The verdict is in, this Goober game is actually good, and my score for Grand Theft Auto 5 is a 7.5 out of 10. I definitely recommend it, and I think everyone should play it at least once. Although now that I think about it, that sentiment might wear off in a decade. I mean, even though it's 20 years old, I've heard people say everyone should play San Andreas at least once, and fuck San Andreas.